be here with you all. And let me take a moment of personal privilege, if I may, to introduce two members of my family to you. My bride, Karen, of almost 25 years, and our son, Drew, who's a senior undergrad student here on the campus. We have a second son, Rob, who's a new freshman at Mississippi College, who called me yesterday, by the way, and said, Dr. Bing, that he had decided on a BBA major. So he's going to be a business student here very shortly. And then we have a high school junior, also a son, at Madison Central. So I take the opportunity to introduce them to you to let you know that, as is true with all the rest of you all, every time you have an opportunity to take another step, whether it's off to school, new job, making a decision about a career, making a decision about a spouse for some of you, the fact that your family framework has provided a strong foundation for you is a critical point for you always to rely on. No matter what success you might enjoy here at school or in your career, work hard on building a strong family around you. Enough of the sermon. I was determined to be pristine today and not to be crass and commercial at all, because I'm here invited as a member of a really prestigious lectureship series to offer a lecture. So I will not offer you any books for sale, but I will tell you that if you are so inclined, you can find this very book at the campus bookstore. Now, I say that only partly tongue-in-cheek. Really, whether you buy one or not is of no moment to me or my family. We make no money off the book. It was the original publication was funded by a foundation. All the proceeds go back to a foundation, so neither Gary Nash, who is my counterpart on the blue side of the aisle, nor myself takes any income off book sales. So I can tell you in good conscience, if what I'm about to tell you over the course of the next several minutes is of any interest to you, you might find the book in the background and the additional details also to be of interest. But I also put it up there because I think it assists us in the substance of today. As I appreciate it, where we are right now in the course of your study is power and politics and organizations. And I'll tell you, I thought seriously about how I might, as a guy who didn't know much about anything except politics, offer some comments that might be of some value to you all in the context of power and politics in organizations. And what I decided was to take slight liberties with the topic, and to talk about power and politics in Mississippi. Because as you know, Mississippi is not a state, we're a club, and so that's sort of like an organization, right? We're all almost related, and if we're not related, we know somebody to whom we're related. So, I mean, it's just, we really are a tight-knit society, so we can sort of think of our entire state as an organization. And even if you think I've stretched a little much there, perhaps some of the ideas that I'll talk about here over the course of the next few moments, you can think of ways to apply to business organizations, social organizations, and the other types of structures that are the subjects of your study here in this class. But when Jerry and I undertook to do this project, we determined that there ought to be some reason for where we started. We chose 1976. There are any number of other places, obviously, we could have started our study, but we chose 76 because it was such a benchmark date in terms of the dramatic changes that have occurred in our state since then. Now, I think I can guess from just a quick sweep around the room that every student in here has been born since 1976. Am I right about that? You don't have to admit if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right about that. And I guess my point just is this. In the course of your lifetime and my adult lifetime, I can hardly overstate to you how dramatic have been the changes that have occurred in the power and political structure of our state, and how that might counsel us in the dramatic things that can happen in literally the blink of an eye in the history of any organization, business or otherwise. Because you can appreciate that 30 years in the life of a state is a flash. It's almost no period of time. I finished school in 1979. So basically from the time I started to college until today, all of the changes that we're going to talk about happened. And I still like to think that's a relatively short period of time, right? Notwithstanding that I sort of get to feeling older every morning when I get out of bed. But my point just is this. If we can see the kinds of dramatic changes in the power and politics of an entire state, such as we're about to discuss over the next several minutes, in the course of only half a generation's time, be assured that power and politics can dramatically change any organization in which you were involved, business or otherwise, in a very short period of time, both for good and for ill. Now, fortunately, many people would believe that the dramatic changes that we have seen in Mississippi over the last 30 years have generally been for good, even if you might not think so from a partisan standpoint, as if you can back up away from whatever partisan hat you might wear. Most people believe that the changes that we've seen in our state over the last 30 years have really been dramatically for the good. Now, I'll have to give you one caveat. I'm a partisan Republican. So I offer that bias at the outset. To the extent that you think any of my observations are biased because of that, I've at least given you the disclaimer. But I will also promise you I'll do my best to give you what I believe to be objective observations that I think are borne out by the facts and not necessarily by my opinions. And if, on the other hand, if I offer some specific opinion that might be colored by my partisanship, I'll admit that to you at the front end. But all the same, if you think everything I'm going to say from now on is tainted, then at least I've told you at the front end, right? All right, let's look at what has happened here in the short period of time that we're talking about, and maybe some reasons why. In 1976, as today, there were 8 statewide elected officials in Mississippi, from governor down to insurance commissioner, although I don't know which would be the lowest of the 8. But those are the 8 statewide elected officials that we have. All were Democrats in 1976. As today, there were 122 members of the House of Representatives. All but 4 were white Democrats. 52 members of the Mississippi State Senate in 1976. 0 African Americans. Now, we know about the unflattering part of our history where race relations is concerned. And most of you would know, at least generally, that until fairly recent years, Mississippi was essentially a one-party state, a Democrat party state, which many would say, with good reason, means sort of a no-party state. If there's only one party from a partisanship standpoint, that sort of means there's no party. That just happens to be the structure through which all politics runs. So as recently as this time frame that we're talking about, literally 30 years ago, almost no African American representation in our legislature and almost no Republican representation. 122 members of the House, 119 Democrats. 52 members in the Senate, 50 Democrats. So almost no African Americans, almost no Republicans, only 30 years ago. Now, 2 of the things that our material for today focus on are the function or the role of gossip as a tool or a detriment in an organization, and the function of political skill as a de-stressor inside organizations, which I thought was really kind of a strange and maybe even counterintuitive suggestion. I read through the material, and a lot of the observations make perfect sense. But you would also appreciate that just as surely as it is true that gossip plays a role in any kind of organization, from your social organizations to the business world to the classroom to the entire B school, it's 1,000 times primed in the political arena. Because as your authors pointed out, gossip is almost never a linear deal. It's almost never one person to one person. It's almost always a broader dynamic than that. Almost always lots of more things are taking place, lots of more conversations are being conducted, and what I have told to the dean, I have no idea what it's going to look like by the time I hear it again 3 days later, right? We just don't know what's going to happen when we start talking about things. That's part of the premise of the writing. Well, again, magnify it by 1,000 prime in the political arena, in statewide politics. When you have some idea or some claim or some charge or some allegation, my heavens, turn on the news tonight at the 6 o'clock news, and you'll see no fewer than a dozen different political ads during the course of a 130-minute television news program, and half or more of those will be based on some allegation which is, just short of claiming that my opponent is an axe murderer. And so somewhere between what the actual objective facts are and the spin that the particular campaign has put on it is how I try to filter through the truth. I belabor that point slightly to make this point. In politics spread large, the public generally has a very skeptical view of what is being said by candidates. Almost always you'll hear the response of kind of the general public who are not political junkies to some kind of really scandalous campaign ad or charge. Almost always the response, am I not correct, is something like, oh, well, that's just politics. We'll get through this when the election's over with, right? We hate it. These negative campaign ads are terrible. I don't know why they do it. It makes me want to vote against everybody. Well, I'll tell you, this is an aside. The reason that you'll see negative campaign ads for probably the rest of our lifetimes is because they still work. And I'm not an advocate of whether they're socially good things or not. I'm just telling you they do drive people's votes. but it's in the context of a general sense of skepticism in the arena spread large about the political process itself. Folks just don't attribute much credibility to what they hear in the political arena, and so if it's really scandalous, it just doesn't matter all that much to folks. Versus a situation in a business organization or inside a school in which there's generally a sense that you ought to be entitled to attach credibility to most of the things that you hear, right? Except if you've ever worked on a construction project. When I was in school during the summer times, I worked on a construction project, and one of my assignments one time happened to be in the carpentry shop, which was not nearly as romantic as it sounds. It was this big open-air barn with all kinds of power saws and lumber, and I was like the lowest of the low, so all I did was move stuff from one pile to another. Well, one guy claimed that he was the saw man. What's the saw man? The saw man supposedly is the guy who is in charge of all the saws. Well, what do you have in a carpentry shop except for saws? So that's basically all the machinery. And he decided when it was time to cover up the saws and be done for the day. So I'm like, a 2-day newbie. The guy tells me he's the saw man. I said, okay, works for me. I'm going to do whatever I'm told to do. So it gets to be, I don't know, maybe we quit at 5 o'clock. It gets to be 4:30. He says, cover them up. So we get out all the wooden covers for the saws and start loading them up. And the big boss comes out just, furious. What in the world's going on? We hadn't heard the whistle blow. We work until the whistle blows. And so I was duly chastised and immediately found out that he can call himself whatever he wants, but the saw man ain't my boss, right? But appreciate what happened there. It's kind of a simple illustration. The point is this, that something that I heard in the workplace where I believed that I ought to be able to attach some credibility to what was being told me ended up kind of working to my detriment. So here's the deal. In the political arena generally, folks have a really skeptical view of things that they hear and see and are able to work pretty well their filters to kind of kick out the dross and collect up what seems to be of some value. In the business arena, our filters are not nearly as thick or as sensitive, and we're much more likely to believe that I'm entitled to attach credibility to the things that I hear. So I offer that to you kind of in the beware category. This slide helps us to understand one of the things that has happened over the course of the time period that we are talking about. Remember a moment ago I said that we really had to think carefully about why we would choose 76 or any other date as our starting point. And the reason that we decided on 1976 was that was the last year in which the Democratic nominee for president took Mississippi's electoral votes, Jimmy Carter. It's hard to think really that could be the case, but in every election since then, the Republican nominee for president has taken Mississippi's electoral votes. Moreover, you saw the very stark disparity, both racially and from a partisan standpoint, that was present in the Mississippi legislature in 1976. So for those two reasons, we thought that was a pretty good sort of benchmark or starting point for how we would do our study and whether we could actually glean some conclusions. I remember when I was an undergraduate, I wrote an essay for which one of my major professors then really roundly just rode me. Because one of the points that I made was, I think that political science can be called a pure science, or words to that effect. I think I wrote it maybe a little bit more elegantly than that, but that was my point. And of course, he completely rode me because it's complete nonsense. Political science is not a pure science. You can't put in 2 parts of X and 3 parts of Y and always know that you're going to get Z in politics. And why? What's the variable? With people. You don't know from one day to the next what the person closest to you is going to do, let alone what in Mississippi 1 million voters are going to do. So it's by no means is it a pure science. But Jerry and I believe that there ought to be some factors, though, that we can measure to help us determine what in the world happened here, and maybe to have some ability to predict what might happen next. And really, isn't that what you want to be able to do if you are going to be an effective manager in the business arena? Granted, you got the same kind of variables I have in the political arena. You got people, right? I've heard a manager in the past say, if it wasn't for my personnel issues and my customer issues, I'd love my business. Well, what else is business? You got personnel issues and customer issues. That's all you got. That's your business. And so the fact is, the variables you're going to have to deal with in your career, wherever you find yourself in the business arena, are exactly the same variables I deal with in the political arena. It's people. It's hard to predict what people are going to do given any number of different sets of circumstances. But it's not impossible to at least
have some notion of what might happen next based on what has happened up until now. So that's kind of where we thought we would try to go. So for that reason, I offer you this slide, which shows what's happened in the last several gubernatorial elections in the state of Mississippi. What you see is, if you're a Republican, you kind of like the red line there because generally on an upward curve. If you're a Democrat, maybe you're not completely bummed out because that blue line at least is not going down, but what it is it's flat. The blue line is flat. What that tells us, you all, is in Mississippi politics today, and at least for the intermediate term future, Democrats in our state on a statewide election for governor, which is sort of you want to call that the benchmark, I suppose. We'll talk about presidential politics in a second, can only hope for something around 400,000 votes. In fact, you'll see right here at the end that until Governor Musgrove's re-election attempt in 2003, Democrats didn't get back above 400,000 from way back in 20 years earlier. And frankly, for those of you who have studied Mississippi politics at all, what you know is that you really can't even use this time frame as a good bellwether for what's happening today. Because the 79 and 83 elections were so bizarre and so sort of off the charts. So I'll talk about the 83 election in a few minutes in the context of gossip, if you happen to remember much about that one. But I guess my point just is, you could almost lock this chart off right there. And my further point is, what it shows us is that Democrats have really had to scramble to get back up to the 400,000 vote number. I offer you that to say this. In the business enterprise, you're always going to be able to have the benefit of history and rely upon it. Don't trust it as your only basis for what ought to happen next, but you need to know what your history is, particularly in the context, if you want to put dollar signs instead of votes here on these lines. And if the high water mark you've ever reached in your business is 400K or 400 million, you need to know that. And on the other hand, if you have information that tells you that a competitor, although volatile, has the prospect and has demonstrated the prospect of blowing the top off of your own revenue numbers, you need to figure out why that is. So if I'm a Democrat political consultant right now, what I want to know is, why in the world is it that I won in 1999 and just got so clobbered in 95 and 2003, and I'll be willing to tell you that in 1 week in 2007, those lines are going to look probably even a little more dramatic than that. I think Haley Barbour's going to win in a huge landslide a week from today. And so I want to know what's going on here. How did I win this election? And my answer to you is, you didn't. I lost it. You see what the numbers show you? Did the Democrats get a big bump in 1999 that allowed them somehow to break out of their 400,000 vote doldrums? No. We lost that election because we didn't get the votes we should have gotten. Business application. Business application is when I know what my historical numbers are and I have some kind of an aberration like this, somebody's got to go to the house, or I got to change my systems, or we did something wrong. It's not that my competitor kicked me. Look what my competitor did. Almost a flat line. It's that I fell off the charts in 1999. So granted, I can't compare apples to apples in the political arena versus the business arena, but it strikes me there's some pretty important lesson to be learned there about what I ought to be doing when I look at my history and I know that my environment has not changed that much, and I see some really aberrant results such as that. It means that somewhere I fouled up. So be counseled by your mistakes as well as by your successes. This is what the charts look like in presidential elections. The numbers are considerably different for Republicans, but almost identical for Democrats. Now, why does that matter? The reason it does, you all, is that in every state, there may be some very, very rare exceptions in recent history, but I don't know of any. In every state, presidential elections always have a vastly higher turnout than other elections in those states. Now, we're one of only 3 states, as you may know, that has statewide elections in the off year just before a presidential election year. Anybody know the other 2 besides Mississippi that are this year? Just had Louisiana, that's right, and Kentucky. Only 3 in the entire country. So we're sort of an aberration from a calendar standpoint in that respect. But even setting that aside, other states, many other states, have their statewide elections in the off, even-numbered election years between presidential election years. And their turnout is always much lower in those elections than it is for presidential elections, for very obvious reasons. I mean, we feel like we're saturated with statewide politics, but as you know, in a presidential election year, that's just all you hear from sun up to sundown all the time is, the weight of the free world hangs in the balance, and that's all we hear about. And it really does drive turnout. And that's why these numbers are so different for Republicans. But look at the big deal for Democrats from a purely political standpoint. You all is that their numbers are flat, almost identical to their numbers in gubernatorial election years versus, all right, here's the average for Republicans in presidential election years. Here it is in gubernatorial election years. About 150,000 votes different. See what's going on there? So here's what that tells me. Is there is something in the political winds in the state of Mississippi that allows for Republicans to pick up something on the order of 150,000 votes, roughly 15% plus of the entire voter turnout in a presidential election year versus a gubernatorial election year, versus for the Democrats a margin of another 10,000 votes, almost nothing, almost a flat line. And the reason that I have this next slide is this combines gubernatorial races and presidential races. Hang with me because this is important. I know it's a little bit heavy slogging right now, but this is important. This combines presidential election results and gubernatorial election results for the time period reflected on the chart. And look at the averages here. The Democrats are almost completely flatlined at 400,000, and the Republicans have an average of almost 450,000, and as you can see in recent years really have run the prospect of blowing the roof off. Now what that tells me in terms of power in politics is this, is that the variable of the voter, the human voter, his mindset and his thinking now has made a dramatic shift from where he was as recently as 30 years ago. 30 years ago, many Mississippi voters really believed that they would turn green and grow horns if they voted Republican. Today, quite the contrary, the growth factor, if you want to call it that, is Republican politics, at least at the top of the ticket, at least among presidential and gubernatorial candidates. And the reason that's important to you all is that it gives us an idea of the kinds of factors and forces that drive the way Mississippians think. And even if you don't give two hoots about politics, you ought to care about what I'm about to tell you from a business standpoint. What we know from these factors is that Mississippians are driven far, far more strongly by what they perceive as their cultural values than what they might perceive as their economic values. Now, I'll tell you that that's important from a whole lot of different perspectives. One thing turns one of the fundamental tenets of political science on its head. Those of you who are political science undergrads might remember that you often heard the experts say that people vote their pocketbooks, right? People vote their interests and not their hearts. Wrong. It's just wrong. At least in Mississippi, and I would say generally across the Deep South, and really the red states in the West, people are driven far more strongly by what they perceive as the protection of their cultural values than what they might perceive as the protection of their economic interests. And the reason that's so important to you from a business standpoint, you all, is that almost always when we think about how do I sell more widgets, how do I sell more of my services, how do I get more market share, almost always we think, how do I persuade my customer what? Why it's in his best economic interest to do so. I don't denigrate that as a business strategy. I'm just telling you, at your own risk, do you leave out of the equation, how do I persuade my customer that it also improves his quality of life, that it undergirds his or her cultural values, the things that are important to him, not just when he goes to the bank, but when he goes home at the end of the day. And not just when he checks in at work, but when he checks in at the church house. Again, whatever your personal predilections might be, if you want to be successful in business, pick whatever political stripe you want to pick, be Zen Buddhist, atheist, Southern Baptist, whatever you want to do on the religious side, but you got to think like your customers think. And the power in politics in terms of the way we have seen the shift in Mississippi politics over the course of the last 30 years teaches me that if I want to sell stuff to folks, I need not only to persuade them that it makes sense for their bank accounts, but also that it makes sense for their hearts, that it touches them where it matters to them. And that's one of the things that this chart shows me. Okay, we looked at this slide earlier. 8 out of 8 Democrats, 8 out of 8 white guys in 1976. This year, on qualifying deadline day, 5 out of 8 of those statewide elected officials were Republicans. Very likely, on November the 7th, we will have elected 6. Pretty likely, we will have elected 7. Outside chance, I don't think likely, but outside chance, Republicans would have swept 8 out of 8 statewide elected offices from 1976 to 2007. Extraordinary shift there. Racial breakdown of the House. We looked at this earlier. Only 4 African Americans out of 122 House members. Today it's 36. It'll be a few more, not many more, because the districts have not shifted, but a few more after this round of elections. But after this round of elections in 2010 and 2011, this legislature that you all are about to elect will be the same legislature that sits to redraw all the district lines for the entire next decade based on the numbers of the 2010 census. And there's every reason to believe that that redrawing will result in more African Americans being elected to the legislature. But in any event, pretty dramatic change from that to that. On the Senate side, 0 African Americans in 76, 11 today. Probably that number will remain static through this round of elections. On the party side, the changes are every bit as dramatic at the legislative level as at the executive branch level. And I offer this to you all because what it shows us is the vast, dramatic changes that can occur in relatively short periods of time. Now, this is where I want to hang out for a few minutes. The legislature currently is made up of 47 Republicans and 75 Democrats. The House of Representatives. 47 Republicans, 75 Democrats. That means a shift of 15 would be required for Republicans to gain a majority in the House of Representatives. Almost no objective observer believes that's going to happen. Many, though, believe that there's a reasonable prospect that there might be enough additional Republicans elected in the House of Representatives next Tuesday, maybe 6 or 7 additional Republicans, to swing the balance of power so that in a coalition with conservative Democrats, there could be a legitimate challenge to the leadership of the current Speaker of the House. I offer no opinion on that one way or the other, except to tell you objectively that's a realistic possibility that will happen. Here's why I think it matters to you. Because the ultimate playing out of the principles of power and politics that are the subject of the written material that you have, as well as I suspect a lot of Dr. Bing's observations, is going to be played out if there is a floor fight for Speaker of the House. And here's the reason. When I work on behalf of a candidate for statewide office, I'm trying to figure out what in the world ought I to do to properly position this candidate to be the most attractive to 1 million voters. But when there's a floor fight for Speaker of the House, the universe is 122. So many guys that can vote. 122 men and women who are in the House of Representatives. And if the election were held right now, it would be about 50 who are strongly for the current Speaker and about 50 who are strongly opposed to the current Speaker and 22 in the middle that the whole fight is over. So that makes the universe even smaller, right? I know I got 50. I know I can't get those 50. That leaves me 22. So what we're about to see, if in fact there is a floor fight for Speaker, again, whether you care 2 hoots about Mississippi politics, this is going to be so instructive for you who are trying to better prepare yourself as business managers, because in a very identifiable short period of time with an existing small universe of prospective voters, read that customers, we're about to see every known political and power technique available to mankind brought to bear. Gossip and rumor. You almost, if you do nothing more than scan the front page or occasionally the editorial page or watch a glimpse or 2 of the local news, you have heard rumors over the course of the last several months that the current Speaker has 62 votes lined up and they're committed, and so he knows he's going to be reelected. And then the Speaker's primary opponent is saying, I got 65 guys who say that they might be with me, but for sure they're not committed to the current Speaker. So, of course, you can't, 62 plus 65, that's more members than there are in the left, right? So, one thing you know is that you got to filter that through your, this is the political arena, so not too much credibility filter. But on the other hand, a known universe of a limited number of customers that I have to play all of this off of, so I can begin, if I'm a careful observer, do a little checking on the credibility myself. Second thing is, the big variable factor is not just the 122 players or just the 22 in the middle, but we still have an election, right? We still have an election a week from today, and so we don't even know who the 122 players are going to be yet. So if things go as I think they could, and Republicans pick up 4 or 5 or 6 seats and get close to a majority and are able to work with some others to build this coalition that I'm thinking about, then what we're going to be able to see is the identifiable prospect of the second factor that was the object of your written materials today being brought into bear, and that is political skills as a de-stressor. Now, is there ever anything that's been more counterintuitive to you, if you read it? Did you read it? Don't tell me if you read it. Political skills as a de-stressor in the organization. That seems to me to be completely counterintuitive, because what I'm thinking is that the guy who has to operate kind of on the strength of political skills is the guy who's creating all the stress in the environment, right? Well, that's where it's really important to know the distinctions between players and political operators. And we all, you know it, even if you wouldn't call them that, but you know the difference. You know immediately when a guy has picked up a baby to kiss a baby and never held a baby before in his life, right? You just know that immediately, versus the guy who is really a dad and he's picked up lots of babies, so he's perfectly comfortable with this child. Or you know perfectly the difference between the guy, ladies, who comes in and offers you a genuine and kind compliment versus a fawning, gratuitous comment that's clearly designed just to win your favor for political or other reasons, right? You know that immediately. And gentlemen, the same thing. You know when your friends are being genuine with you or not, and I promise you the voters do too. So this idea of political skills as de-stressor requires first the distinction that we acknowledge that there are people who exercise political skills as a natural, attractive outgrowth of their personalities on the one hand, and those who do it for purely coldly calculating reasons on the other. And we see that in the political arena, we see it in the academic arena, we see it in the business arena. So, put your filters on. Make good judgments when you see those sorts of things taking place. Bill Clinton, for example. Bill Clinton and I disagree on probably 90% of our politics. But I had the privilege during the time that I was serving in Governor Fordyce's administration to sit in a room about a half again as large as this, with not many more people than this. And he was standing up about like I am right now. He spoke for an hour. No notes, completely cogent, brilliant, mesmerizing, engaging, hypnotic, genuine. I disagreed with everything he said, but I loved the guy by the time he got done. Why is that? It's because whatever you think about Bill Clinton, both his politics or his personal, whatever you think about it, the simple fact of the matter is his political skills are a natural outgrowth of the person that he is. He just genuinely likes people. He likes being around folks, and he engages well with people, and he makes every person in the room feel as though he's their best friend, and not in an artificial sense, because it really matters to him that you agree with him. And so in the course that he has to try to persuade you, he's going to do everything he can to walk out of that room with 100% agreement, knowing perfectly well that he won't have it. It's just the force of his personality. On the other hand, all of us can think of political figures, none of whom I will mention, because I don't want to offend anybody's political sensibilities, who are clearly, almost always, putting on a show when they're in front of folks. And you always wonder, what is it really that's going on in that person's heart and mind? Whatever their I just want to know something about the person. With Bill Clinton, warts and all, we knew the person, right? And he was who he was. Completely endearing and engaging to most Americans, and that's why he was so politically successful. I offer all that to say, in your business organizations, just as in the political arena, you and all of your colleagues come as a complete package. For some of you, political skills are just a natural outgrowth of your personality. You just know that people just like hanging around with you, and you're just likable, and you're not pretentious. You don't think you're the most important person in the room, and that's attractive to folks. On the other hand, some of you know that you really sort of have strained relationships, and that you really kind of have to think about doing the right thing to build professional networks. Work on that would be my advice, by the way, as a free aside. Work on that. But my point is simply this, that inside the business organization, as in the political arena, the distinction that we're making kind of as our first point here is that I need to know the difference between folks who are exercising political skills as a natural outgrowth of their personality versus those who are doing it on a coldly calculating basis. Second point is this, that most of the time, the person whose political skills are a natural outgrowth of his or her personality are in fact de-stressors in confrontational times in an organization. Again, I point to Bill Clinton. I mean, he caused me all kinds of high blood pressure during his 8 years of his presidency because I disagreed with so many of his policies. But you got to say, I mean, has there ever been anybody in our lifetimes who's had more problems politically and personally kind of in the public eye than Bill Clinton? And he just had such a gentle way about himself in dealing with all of it. He was his worst enemy in one sense, but he was also his best friend in the other, because the skills that he brought to the table allowed him to de-stress very, very highly confrontational circumstances, often of his own making, by the use of his political skills. So while I thought when I first picked up that article that the whole premise was counterintuitive, political skills is a de-stressor in the organization, I really urge you to consider the value that you can bring to your business organizations by the effective, genuine exercise of political skills, such as we've been talking about. What's about to happen here is, as I said, Republicans would need 15 to take majority control. This year, that 15 plus 7 more is 22 plus 4 more. Am I right? 26? I actually thought the number was 28. 15, 4s, 19, 7. It is 26, sorry. Those districts are the districts in which Haley Barbour took an electoral majority in 2003, but are currently held by Democrats in the House of Representatives. I offer them only to make the point that, although I don't think it's going to happen, that is the place where, if it were possible for Republicans to take a majority control of the House, that's where it would happen, in those districts right there. As you can see, some of them are uncontested, so take them off the board. Some of them are open seats, that is to say that the incumbent Democrat is not running for re-election. Some are contested heads up between a Republican and a Democrat. My point is this. You rarely will get to see in the business organization that kind of clear distinction in terms of sort of where I am, what my market share is, and who my competitors are, because there are many more variables than just this. But sometimes you will. Sometimes you will be working in either such a unique market niche or such a limited marketplace, small town, for example, an island continent, that you really can identify exactly what your battleground is. And so for me, if I were doing political consulting and legislative campaigns, which bless the Lord I'm not, but if I were, what I would be thinking here is, all right, I got no chance there. There's an old adage in politics, and I bet the same thing works in business. You can't beat somebody with nobody. Can't beat somebody. You don't have a candidate running against the guy you want to unseat. You can't unseat him, right? Same way in the business arena. You can't outfox your competition. You can't outsell the competitor down the road unless you got something to outfox him with or sell. You got to bring something to the table. So, boom, I got those 7 seats out of the race. These 15 are head-to-head, which means that, by and large, incumbent Democrat legislators are sitting there, and I'll tell you, much more so than in congressional politics, in legislative politics in our state, people don't really make the partisan connection very often between who the governor is versus who their legislator is. Or said another way, wouldn't bother folks in the least, for the most part in our state, to vote Republican for governor and Democrat for their legislative incumbent. He goes to church with them, or they're in Lions Club together. There are just too many personal factors involved. Remember, we're not a state, we're a club. So I'm going to think, well, I got a chance there, but not a very good one. But over here, my competitor has abandoned the battlefield. Right? The guy down the road has closed up shop. And so he's allowed me this bit of market share that I didn't used to have, that he had, and he's abdicated. So either as a political consultant or as a business manager, I'm going there 4 sheets to the wind. I don't think it's strange to you all for me to suggest to you that there are some definite parallels between what's happening in the shifts in Mississippi politics and political power and what ought to be going on in business organizations that are successful, particularly for those of you who think that you would be doing business in the state of Mississippi. We looked at this party membership slide a little bit earlier. That's what it looks like today on the Senate side. Remember, on the House side, Republicans are 15 votes short. On the Senate side, Republicans actually, for the first time since Reconstruction, have a majority in the state Senate. Now, that occurred because on qualifying deadline day, an incumbent Democrat, Senator Tommy Gallant, had been in the Senate 30-some-odd years, longer than the time period we had surveyed in the book, qualified as a Republican for a variety of reasons. One of which was he was kind of prescient, kind of saw the future. You may recall that the state Democratic Party had rattled some sabers about folks who were supporting Republicans but then wanted to run as Democrats, and they were saying, we're not going to certify you as Democrats if you do that. You're either a Democrat or you're not. And Gallant took them at their word and decided to requalify as a Republican rather than as a Democrat. Turns out that there may have been some wisdom in that because, as you will recall, the state Democratic Executive Committee declined to certify an incumbent legislator, Mary Ann Stevens, and the incumbent insurance commissioner, George Dale. They fought around in the courts for a couple of months and ended up getting put on the ballot, but, Gallant may have had some sense. The second thing is much more practical than that. He and Governor Barber just struck up a big friendship during the hurricane relief efforts. Tommy Gallant represents a district right on the coast in Biloxi, and there was just some personal affability. I offer that to say this. That's not just an aside. If you had asked me on February the 28th of 2007, what are the chances of Republicans having a majority in the state Senate tomorrow based on Tommy Gallant qualifying as a Republican on deadline day, which was March 1? I would have said zero. I would have said there's no chance of that. I've known the man my entire political career. He's always been a perfect gentleman to me. We get along fine. No chance, though, is he going to qualify. And yet this happened. So here's something that I learned from all of that. Again, set aside the fact that he thought he wouldn't be certified. I think that was only the secondary reason. The primary driving factor here, I believe, was that the guy just developed a personal affinity with the man at the top of the ticket, so much so that it caused him to make a shift after 32 years of elected politics. Don't underestimate the political power in the marketplace of personal relationships. I know you all don't remember this. I was growing up when there was still United Airlines flying. But there used to be a United Airlines commercial on television in which the boss came in and the biggest customer had nuked them. Whatever it was they were selling, their biggest customer had gone to somebody else. And he said, what are we doing wrong? And, had half a dozen different suggestions. Well, our systems aren't effective, or their model 32Z is better than our Model 31B, or everybody had a suggestion. He said, wrong. What we're doing wrong is we're not looking him in the eye anymore. He pulls out 2 United Airlines tickets, says, I'm going to see him. Do not underestimate the power in the marketplace, ladies and gentlemen, of personal relationships. In fact, I'll give you a bonus. Often, personal relationships will allow you to drive a premium price against a competitor just because of the credibility and friendship and affability and trust that has been established with the customer. I promise you I'm right about this, because I do this. Not in some sort of a nefarious sense, but I decide that my services for thus and such a project are going to be X, which I know is +4 of what somebody else would do it for. I just know that. And so often my prospective client will say, well, I can get him to do it for X minus 4. And I'll say, he's great. And I wouldn't be a bit offended. We're still going to be friends. But for me to do it, it's X. And I promise you, I rarely lose a project on price. And it's not because I'm smarter than anybody else or nicer. In fact, I think the older I get, the less nice I get. I used to think I was kind of a nice guy. Now I think I'm just a crotchety old guy. But it's because of relationships that have been built up over time, and friendships and trust and credibility that people in the marketplace will acknowledge. I'm willing to pay a premium for what I believe will be a higher prospect of predictability for the result than to get a bargain on the front end and not be able to have confidence that I end up with the result that I want. I promise you it works in selling widgets too. If you are like the guy in the old United Airlines commercial who recognizes that sometimes the power of my business model is just based on my customer's belief in me, maybe the 32Z is marginally better than the 31A that I sell, but I'm better than my competitor. I promise you that is going to pay dividends for you over time. And so that's what I think happened in the case of Haley Barbour and Tommy Galot, and resulted in Republicans for the first time in the modern era having a majority in the Mississippi State Senate. This is what the Senate races look like. There are 8 districts in the Senate currently held by Democrats, but which Haley Barbour took in 2003. So again, sort of what I would perceive as my battlefield if I were consulting the legislative candidates on the Republican side right now. Again, we fouled up. We advocated the battlefield 4 times. We had an opportunity, but you can't beat somebody with nobody. And we put nobody up. So we gave them a free ride on those 4. So that only leaves us 4. And of those, really, in my estimation, only 2 of those seats were really in play. So my best guess is that we're going to see about a net 0 change one way or the other. Maybe 1 seat one way or the other in the Senate, but about a net 0 change. So what? So what does an MBA student care about in an organizational class about whether Republicans have a 1-seat majority or a 2-seat minority in the Mississippi State Senate? Here's what you ought to care about that. Remember a little while ago we talked about the House coming close to party parity and the prospect that that might result in a sure enough floor fight over the Speaker of the House. On the Senate side, the parallel is this. The lieutenant governor in our state, constitutionally, is the presiding officer of the Senate and serves as governor in the absence of the governor. But those are the lieutenant governor's only powers under the Constitution. Gets to serve as governor when the governor goes to New York City, gets to preside over the Senate. But what do we know about our lieutenant governor in our state? That he or she is much more powerful than that because the Senate has vested the lieutenant governor by its rulemaking authority with the ability to refer bills to committees, to name committee chairmen, to determine basically the entire rules of procedure for the entire state Senate, a hugely, hugely powerful role for the passage or killing of legislation. But it's all done by Senate rule, not by the Constitution. And the reason all that's important, hang with me on this, the reason all that's important is that in 1 week we're going to have a Senate that's either 1 or 2 votes plus Republican or 1 or 2 votes plus Democrat, and conceivably a lieutenant governor of the other party. Right? I mean, I think Phil Bryant's very likely going to be elected, but I think there's a better than even chance that Democrats might win a seat or 2 back on the Senate side. And so we have a Republican lieutenant governor and maybe a 1 or 2 vote majority of Democrats in the Senate. Well, that body then has the authority to change the rules if it wishes and strip the lieutenant governor of all of his power except for that which is granted by the Constitution. Presiding over the Senate, playing like he's governor when the governor goes out of town, which is basically, if you'll pardon, the rough equivalent of what someone is quoted as having described the value of the office of Vice President of the United States, which is about the equivalent of a warm bucket of spit. Just who would want the job if all you got to do was to pretend like you were the governor when the governor's out of town and preside over the state Senate whenever they were in session. No, the reason that people want that job, and the reason that it's so hotly contested in our state is, other than Speaker of the House, it's the other most important function in state government as far as the passage and killing of legislation is concerned. So, from the standpoint of the application that this might matter to you for a business organization, is this. How can I, if life were nothing but partisanship, which fortunately is much more complex than that, but if life was nothing but partisanship, how can I, as a Republican lieutenant governor-elect, hope to preserve my position of power by making sure the rules aren't changed by the newly Democratic state Senate? Personal relationships. I just go talk to them. First, I make sure I got all my Republicans. I make sure all my sales team is right where they're supposed to be. My product's as good as it can be. My systems are as effective as they possibly can be. But then I'm going to go start picking off my competitors. I'm going to get the folks that I think are most disabused of my competitor's product or service, or the ones who are closest to my core competency. The Democrats that I've known the longest in political terms. And by personal relationships, I'm just going to pick me off 2 or 3 to make sure that I have a majority to keep the rules from being changed. Don't worry about all the text. Let me tell you what that says. Back in the summertime, Judge Alan Pepper over in the Delta ruled on a lawsuit brought by the state Democratic Party, which basically said that our primary system of nominating primary candidates, Democrats and Republican Party candidates, is unconstitutional because it prevents Democrats, those were the ones who brought the lawsuit, from keeping folks from voting in their primary when they don't want them to vote in their primary. Now, every one of us in here knows two of the three key rights protected by the First Amendment. We know about speech and religion, well, we know about press. Few of us would remember that one of the rights protected by the First Amendment is the right to association. And that's what Judge Pepper picked up on, because his ruling is premised on the notion that the right to associate with whoever I want to must include the right to disassociate from those I don't want to. For example, I can't have a club meeting with my Bobos over here if anybody who wants to can come into my club meeting, right? So he says that the same thing ought to apply to party primaries. The Democrats say they don't want Republicans jumping over and fooling around in their primaries and want to be able to exclude Republicans. Fine. That's what the First Amendment guarantees their right to be able to do. But the net effect of this is, you all, he has like thrown a gasoline drum full onto the fire of Mississippi politics. And here's the application for you all. This dramatically changes the business of folks who care about politics from a professional standpoint in Mississippi. I don't know what's going to happen. Right now it's on appeal to the Fifth Circuit, and I'm involved in it on the lawyer side, so I can't talk about it any more than I just have. But I don't know what the result is going to be. What I do know is that if Judge Pepper's ruling stands, it will change Mississippi politics as much as anything since the reapportionment battles of the Civil Rights era. And I do not believe I overstate that matter. If I had to choose one thing to which I attribute the dramatic racial and partisan changes that we've just outlined from 1976 to today, if I had to choose just one factor, and there are many, the one factor would be reapportionment. The fact that the United States Supreme Court and the local federal courts ultimately forced Mississippi's political structure to change by drawing fair lines that gave people a fair opportunity to elect representatives of their choice is the primary factor that led to the changes that we've been talking about. I believe that if Judge Pepper's ruling stands, it will be every bit as powerful an impact on the way we do the business of politics in our state as all of those battles were. So just be advised that there are some things that are going to happen in the business arena just as surely as in the political arena that you just weren't smart enough to think of in your wildest dreams. For example, in my most optimistic moment as a partisan Republican, it never occurred to me that the Democrats would sue the state of Mississippi in a suicide pact designed to completely destroy their existence as a modern-day political party. But that's exactly what they've done, and I'll have that conversation with any of you who wants to after the fact. The effect of this would be that the Mississippi Democratic Party would no longer exist as a potent political force in the state of Mississippi if this ruling holds. And I'm not sure they get it even yet. But more on that privately if you care about it. And then sometimes just as surely as you can't predict what some factor is going to occur in the business arena, and you just have to know that there are going to be some things you change. Sometimes your competitor just does something so dumb that it's brilliant. Right? Now, how in the world am I supposed to advise this guy's opponent? How do you beat a guy whose slogan is, vote for 2 bits Crawford, put your 2 bits in? I mean, I'm going to say that you might as well just cash in your chips. I mean, that guy, that's the most brilliant political comment I've ever heard in my life. Incidentally, he just got his brains beat out. He lost by, several thousand votes. But sometimes things are going to happen in the business arena in which you say, I might as well close up shop. They got me. It's all over. It's never that bad. No matter how bad it is, it's never that bad. No matter how big the crisis, no matter how big the crash in your system, no matter how much better the 32Z is than my 31A, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. It's never that bad. And besides, there's a book that you can read to help you with all of this. Y'all, I've had such a good time today thinking through these things with you, and I hope that I have not tortured the political analysis just to try to find applications in the business world. I think that some of the observations that I've made are valid, and perhaps you would find them helpful. But if there are specific areas of what we've already discussed or other things that you'd like to talk